Dr. Simon, a famous psychiatrist from a mental institution. He is remembering his past, and it is revealed that the small boy from the first scene was none other than himself. Dr. Simon survived the car crash but was deeply traumatized by it, as he still remembers it to this day. Along with him, we are introduced to one of his patients, Professor Ersheim, who is an intelligent mathematical scholar. He is seen writing something on the board with great intent and focus. After he's done writing, Professor Ersheim hands over the board to Dr. Simon while mentioning that it is pointless. We can see that he has written the numbers 1 to 9 several times. Dr. Simon glances at it and praises his patient's work to be very good. He then asks the professor if it looks wrong to him. In an irritated tone, Professor Ersheim comments that it is wrong because it is missing the hidden number bleem. Here, we get to know that the professor talks a lot about this mystery number but cannot prove its existence. He simply replies that one has to trust him as he is a mathematician, not a lunatic. Later at home, Dr. Simon is conducting thorough research on the history of Professor Ersheim. He is surprised to find that the professor is no ordinary mathematician, as he has been awarded with numerous mathematician awards. He has even won the Fields Medal, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, but in the mathematical circle. After further digging, Dr. Simon also finds out that the professor never had any history of mental illness or emotional trauma. This brings up questions like, was the professor really unstable? Or was he locked because his findings were a threat to someone? The next day, Dr. Simon is again discussing the mystery number with Professor Ersheim. After a bit of asking, the professor reveals that the number bleem exists between the regular numbers 3 and 4. Hence, while counting it would be 1, 2, 3, bleem, 4, 5, and so on. Tired of listening to the same supernatural theory, Dr. Simon gets up and asks the professor to prove it. He carries a jar of jelly beans and orders him to separate bleem number of beans to prove the existence of the number. At first, Professor Ersheim is confident that he can accomplish the task and tries to arrange the beans. However, after a bit of struggling, he is unable to align bleem number of them, so he throws everything in a fit of rage. Dr. Simon then taunts the professor that he is not able to prove it because no such number exists. However, a fuming professor retaliates that he is not able to prove it because some external force was preventing him from doing so. Dr. Simon then dismisses his claims by saying that he was there with him the whole time and no one was there to stop him. After the heated conversation, the professor asks the doctor for a pencil and paper to continue his research, but Dr. Simon simply ends the session while saying that he will think about the writing materials some other day. Just then, the professor notices the black marker on the ground nearby the scattered jelly beans. As the security guard arrives, Professor Ersheim goes near the marker and secretly hides it. Before being escorted away to his room, the professor crazily stuffs a bunch of jelly beans in his mouth, which puzzles Dr. Simon. He is then taken away from there and is locked inside room number 304, which is guarded with high security and surveillance. Meanwhile, the scattered jelly beans on the floor remind Dr. Simon of the accident again. On that day, after the police arrived to collect the deceased body, a young Dr. Simon picked up an identical jelly bean from the road. It was dropped by the man who was struck and killed by his car. In the next scene, Dr. Simon is preparing to leave for home after a frustrating day at work. As he is going down the elevator, it takes an unusually long time to reach the 3rd floor from the 4th. This confuses him and he starts thinking about the authenticity of the mystery number bleem. Following the strange encounter in the elevator, Dr. Simon starts digging up more information about the mysterious number. He finds out that Professor Ersheim was actually arrested due to an outburst at a conference. After this, he starts listening to numerous recordings of his conversations with the professor. In one of the interviews, Professor Ersheim says that the number bleem is the very fabric of the universe. He also says that there are numerous dimensions in the galaxy, but an average human cannot see that. He says that the main reason for not being able to explore other dimensions is the insufficiency of proper maths. He also adds that if the mystery number bleem can be discovered, humans can travel to other dimensions and explore them. With the discovery of the number bleem, humans will also be able to time travel and communicate faster than the speed of light. As Dr. Simon is deeply immersed in the recordings, he notices an ant on his desk. Being the kind human that he is, he carefully picks it up with a piece of paper and throws it out of the window safely. In the next scene, a tired Dr. Simon is at a bar having some drinks. He is fed up with the events surrounding him lately, so he is on a break to clear his mind. As he is cracking open some peanuts, one of them suddenly moves and cracks itself open without any external force. The doctor is immediately shocked by the supernatural encounter, but before he can calm himself, he sees Professor Ersheim writing some mathematical calculations on the window of the bar. He immediately gets up and starts going after the professor. After a bit of chasing, Dr. Simon reaches a silent alley. As he walks a little further, he finds a television playing news about the exact accident from his childhood. The news also reports that the old man hit by the car had not been identified in the 3 days since the incident. He then sees his younger self watching the bizarre news. Turns out that the doctor was just having a nightmare and he is awakened by a phone call. There, he is informed that Professor Ersheim has gone missing from his room. In this way, his dream had some truth after all. The doctor then immediately heads to the mental institution. After reaching, a worker named Jean explains that they are about to initiate a second sweep to locate the professor. He also stresses that the professor was present during bed check and he had not let anyone else into the room. Now the question might arise, how did an old and fragile man like the professor escape such a highly guarded facility? This confuses Dr. Simon equally. As the duo reach room number 304 to investigate, they are shocked to find mathematical equations and formulae written all over the walls. It seems that the professor spent all night conducting his research with the marker. After the inspection, the doctor finds 3 jelly beans on the table, similar to the ones present in his room. He also finds the marker cap on the floor, which reminds him of his childhood accident once again. In the flashback, he picked up a black marker which had its cap missing. All of a sudden, he remembers everything and finds out what has just happened. As Dr. Simon is busy grasping the situation, Jean picks up one of the beans from the table. Despite Dr. Simon forbidding him from touching it, he tosses it up in the air and eats it. However, Dr. Simon still notices 3 jelly beans on the table as if no one ate anything. He then remembers his childhood accident clearly. The movie ends as we are shown the scene of the accident once again. Jelly beans are scattered all across the road and the face of the deceased man is finally shown. It is Professor Ersheim himself. Now, for those of you who are still confused, let me explain. This movie is based on time travel, where the main protagonist, Dr. Ersheim, is a time traveler. While he was apprehended and locked inside a mental institution for being unstable, he was actually a genius and knew things no other human could think of. His lifelong theory of the secret number Bleem was correct all along, and his assumptions of time travel were true too. Because he was locked in a cell with no materials to continue his research, he couldn't prove his theory and was laughed at by everyone. However, when he finally got his hands on the black marker, he used all his mathematical capabilities to discover Bleem. As Bleem is the centerpiece for time travel, he used it to jump between different time periods. In this instance, he went back in time to Dr. Simon's past, where he was unfortunately struck and killed by his car. Although he succeeded in time traveling, he forgot one rule: what does not belong in the timeline will be discarded by the timeline. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. On the cold hills of a deserted island, Villain is trying to find a safe spot to camp. He walks for miles until he slips and falls into a freezing river, but after floating away for a while, he manages to climb out and continue his journey. When he gets too tired to keep going, he stops to rest against a big rock, grabs a flower to eat, and begins thinking back to how all this started. Villain is in jail for life for the assassination of 6 men, when one afternoon, he's taken to see the prison governor, who asks him what he dreams of. He isn't the only person going through this. Various of his fellow prisoners are also being called to the governor's office and are asked the same question. Morayak says he wants to see the sea, Yakut wants to witness the war against China, Obasyanka won't speak, Albazian wants to work in this prison and be a governor, Tolia wants to follow the progress of the space station, and Sipa wants to see women again. But Villain's answer is never shown. The governor tells them they've been selected to be transferred to a penal colony, and shortly afterward, all prisoners are boarded into a ship. Just like in the actual prison, the prisoners are divided into groups and put into cells, although Albazian acts like he is the boss and even kills a man to take his bed. When the hatch is finally closed and the boat takes off, the prisoners start panicking, thinking this has all been a trick to let them die at sea. As the men begin getting violent, Villain remembers a conversation he had with Sipa back in prison. Sipa has some severe mental issues and would always draw on the wall and talk nonsense, but that day, he mentioned heaven and hell not having any seats left and a third purgatory-like place being prepared for people like that. Julien had thought it was more of his usual nonsense back then, but he's starting to see the merits of it now. After a while, everyone calms down and tries to spend the trip chit-chatting and eating, but in the middle of the journey, a gang escapes from one of the cells, looking for their compatriot. Albazien pretends to negotiate at first only to kill the man they're looking for, causing a riot to start. Prisoners on both sides begin hitting and killing each other through the bars except for Starry, an old man that stays behind prey. The fight doesn't last long though. The guards quickly arrive and after stopping them with a warning shot, they throw a sleeping gas grenade to knock them all out. Eventually, they make it to a deserted island, where the prisoners are put into numbered handcuffs and left at the beach so they can listen to what Mr. Olesen and Marta, the heads of the Terra Nova project, have to say. Since the death penalty has become illegal in all countries, prisons have been running out of space to hold such a large number of criminals, which is why the Russian government has offered this land to start this project, funded by some international organizations. Starting today, the prisoners are colonists living under their protection, and everything they need to survive is being provided, including food that should last 3 months. A satellite will be watching them all the time, and there also are some communication buoys around. They have the possibility to take a boat to one of them to press the red button and say what they need. If a green light appears, that means the request has been accepted. Albazien isn't happy about the idea of being recorded 24/7, so he throws a big rock in protest, but the guards quickly make him stand back with some warning shots. Marta clarifies that the buoys can also be used to ask to leave the project by saying their name and the reason why they want to leave. If they do, they'll be returned to prison. By putting the buoys on the sea instead of on the beach, they make sure that the decision is thought twice before risking getting on a boat. Before leaving, the guards drop a bunch of keys on the sand, explaining they are numbered to match their handcuffs. The prisoners rush towards them and start fighting over them while Villain and Sipa stay safely behind, only grabbing the keys that the others drop. Starry also decides to stay behind and watch how a gang forms a line around the keys to keep their rivals out, and a group goes to the crates the guards left to pick up some weapons and attack the crowd with them. Eventually, Ali's gang takes control of the situation. Ali gets a jacket and good shoes for himself and Starry before choosing a man to send out on the boat, but as soon as he grabs someone, the group takes the chance to attack and the fight starts again. Dozens of men die in the fight. Morayek kills Ali with a rock, Albazien kills Starry also with a rock, and the 3 men that get on a boat to reach the buoy fall to the sea and die drowning. All the remaining prisoners go to the warehouse and begin distributing the supplies, and Albazien takes advantage of the tools found to get his cuffs open by force. Dylan packs a bunch of supplies in a bag and grabs himself a jacket while listening to Sipa say there is no way the food will last 3 months. Then he leaves the area to survive on his own and hopefully find a way out of the island, taking us back to the beginning of the story. Dylan explores the island until he finds an area with no snow and a rocky formation that will provide some shelter, so he decides to sit there while looking at a picture of his family that he's kept hidden in his prison uniform. He misses them terribly, and falls asleep with tears in his eyes. Sometime later, he wakes up when he hears some squealing. Turns out the supplies were filled with rodents, and they are now eating through his food and bag. When it starts raining, Dylan finds shelter under the rock formation he saw before, getting a fire going for warmth and heating some water. After it stops raining, he catches a bird and roasts it over the fire. That's when Sipa finds him. As he chit-chats with him, he tries to steal his knife, but Dylan sees him and takes it back. Sipa offers some salt he had with him and his help in exchange for some meat, which Xiling accepts, so Sipa goes to pick up more wood and sees the family picture on Dylan hung on the rocks, which makes him blow a kiss at Dylan's wife. Afterward, they share the bird, and when they're done eating, Sipa walks to the edge of the cliff, explaining he doesn't jump because he's too afraid. He asks Dylan why he won't die either, and Dylan explains it's because of his family. They're dead and he wants to be buried next to them, which can't happen if he dies on the island. The 2 men fall asleep, and when Dylan wakes up, he finds Sipa has stolen the picture to use it as inspiration for his debauchery. Furious, Dylan beats him up and pushes him off the cliff, but Sipa doesn't die because he doesn't fall into the ocean. He drops on a hill right underneath. But even after this disagreement, the 2 of them travel together as they explore the island. Sipa easily amuses himself with the trash he finds in the water while Dylan tries to fish, but the only living being they find in the water is some sort of aquatic centipede, which freaks Sipa out. While looking around, Dylan is shocked to suddenly find part of a seaplane among the rocks. It only takes going a bit farther up the hill to find the entire plane, which gives him a bit of hope because he used to be a pilot and would be able to fly it. However, 2 men aren't enough to move it, so for now, they go back to their shelter. Dylan starts a fire with some matches he had grabbed at the warehouse, but there's something in them that creates a very toxic smoke. He moves away from the fire and drags a sleeping Sipa with him, who at first won't wake up. It takes a few shakes from Dylan for him to finally regain consciousness, but his mouth only continues to spout nonsense, and Dylan realizes the cold will kill them any minute now. The 2 men decide to go back to the base and see if they can steal some coal. Back in the base, life hasn't been easy for everyone. Obazian and his gang are in control and keeping a routine while sharing the supplies, and Obazian even asks them to call him governor. But they keep anyone that isn't in their team inside the barracks. They only allow them to come out to have a walk in an enclosed area, similar to real prisons, while Estonitz yells at them from the watchtower. When they're sent back, they need to run because whoever is last gets killed to be used as food later. Dylan and Sipa manage to reach the coal box and find the remains of a fire. After walking for so long, they're almost freezing, so they can't help laying down next to the fire and falling asleep. But Sipa wakes up quickly when he hears some noises. The gang is coming over with their latest prisoner for roasting. He runs to hide behind a rock, but Dylan is still out there, so he comes back out to rescue him. But he isn't fast enough and Obazian's men find them and capture them. The two of them are taken back to base, where Obazian tries to decide what their punishment will be for having run away with supplies when they arrived. Yakut tries to remind them that they were on their side during the ship fight, causing Estonitz to insult him for trying to meddle. Yakut replies by hitting him, and this causes the whole gang to team up to hit him in return, earning Yakut a place in the barracks with Dylan and Sipa. They walk around for a while, and when Estonitz announces it's time to return, Dylan stays behind, but Sipa comes back from him and drags him inside with him. They can only watch as the last standing man is captured and tied to a pole, begging for some water as his last wish, so Sipa takes pity on him and brings a cup to his lips before he is killed. Later, before going to sleep, the group discusses the possibility of rebelling. They're unsure because it may be dangerous, but Shram convinces them it's worth trying. The next morning, Tolya shows Obazianka that he's installed a secret trap in his workshop to catch any potential thieves. After the group takes his daily walk, Estonitz tries to get them back inside to get the usual game going, but only 2 men run. The rest stand back and come together while Yakut throws a rock at Estonitz to shut him up. Dylan walks up to Obazian and offers him a deal. If he lets them go to the buoy and ask for food, he'll tell him the location of the plane he found. Obazian accepts and opens the gate to let them out. While Tolya and Dylan go with 2 other men on the boat, Obazian asks his men if they know anything about Dylan, and that's how he learns he was a pilot, that his family died in a plane crash, and he went to jail for killing flight dispatchers at the airport with a rifle. This crime was classified as murder in a state of severe emotional agitation, which Obazian thinks means Dylan has a guilty conscience. As soon as the boat is far enough, he orders the group to go back to the barracks, canceling his deal. Yakut tries to confront them, but he's immediately killed, so Obazian grabs 1 more man before declaring the game is on again. The group can only run back to the barracks since a fight would be a very bad idea because Obazian's men are armed. Meanwhile at sea, one of the men falls off the boat, but they catch him just in time and drag him back up. Tolya reaches the buoy and asks for help, but it's broken, and not even his tools will help. They go back to the shore and Dylan tells Obazian that food is on its way, but Obazian doesn't believe him because there wasn't a green light of confirmation. Tolya reminds him of the existence of the plane, but Obazian doesn't believe that's true either, but it inspires Obazianka to move around with his arms open like one. Obazian finds this distracting and grabs him by the neck, so Tolya uses the chance to come at him from behind and kill him. 2 other members of his group, Amorbek and Ertsanov, kill the rest of their gang and watch Estonitz run away before they can catch him as well. They ask Dylan what to do next, and he asks them to free the men from the barracks because he swears food is coming and they just didn't see the light because it was broken. The men are skeptical about this and remind him now they have plenty of bodies to feed on later, but Tolya thinks they should be buried. Dylan reminds him about the plane as well, so Amorbek and Ertsanov finally accept. They free the prisoners and tell them they'll be waiting a few days for the food to arrive, but they won't be using each other as food anymore, so everyone needs to stay calm and cooperate. They'll also send a group to rescue the plane, which they'll put in a hangar they'll build and slowly repair it to escape later. Suddenly, Sipa interrupts their plans claiming there's no satellite while writing an SOS message using sand and 3 bodies. Sometime later, Estonitz returns to the base, and because of the new rules that say they need to keep the peace, they decide to ignore what he's done to them for now and share their food with him anyway. Dylan guides a group of men towards the plane, and their moods greatly increase when they see he's been telling the truth. Together they take it apart for easier transport and carry the pieces back to base. Eventually, Marta arrives at the island with a bunch of guards. They use gas to keep the men away, but they do allow Dylan come to talk to her and discuss the list of things they've requested. She's confused on why they're asking for gas, and he explains it's for the generators, which are supposed to be wind-powered but they don't work during the polar night. In truth, they want the gas for the plane. Dylan takes the chance to ask why they didn't answer Sipa's SOS message, and Marta explains their satellite is of the infrared kind. They see heat, so they can locate people in stoves but not words. She also wants to know what people were doing so far away from the base some days ago, and he tells her they were fishing. They don't believe him because there's no fish in the area, so he lies again and tells them they've been eating those centipede-like creatures, which she finds very shocking. They also want to know how many of the original 206 colonists are left, which Dylan finds suspicious because they should be able to tell with their satellite. He tells them 87 are left, and many are sick, but nobody wants to abandon the project and return to jail. Before Dylan leaves, Marty tells him he has the right to one personal request, so he gives her a few sheets of paper asking her to provide the group well. Once the guards have left the new supplies, Dylan and his men try the gas in the plane hidden in the hangar and happily confirm it does work. Afterward, they watch a new group of American prisoners arrive as the guards and Marta leave the island. These prisoners have a leader too, a very large man that Dylan tries to shake hands with. The man doesn't take it. In fact, he hits Dylan, which triggers a fight between both sides. The encounter is brutal and nobody hesitates to go for the kill, so Sipa drags Dylan with him to hide him in the workshop. One of the Americans tries to follow them, but he falls on Tolya's trap and instantly dies. Ertsanov goes up against the American leader and gets overpowered, but before he can get killed, Amorbek cuts in and kills the big man instead as the buildings around them catch on fire. All this is being watched by the heads of the project. When they realize the situation is finally out of control and that over 40% of the colony has been killed, Marta calls the central office and is told to proceed with Code Naked Island, which sends a bunch of guards to the island that shoots all the reminder prisoners while Marta burns Dylan's letters. Luckily, a few men are still alive thanks to having hidden in the mountains or the hangar: Dylan, Sipa, Ertsanov, and Tolya. Together they push the plane out, but when they're about to board it, Sipa tells them goodbye and runs to the hill so he can jump into the ocean, not afraid anymore. The remaining trio gets in the plane and Dylan manages to make it take off safely, although the guards shoot at them on the way. His two companions die, but Dylan isn't hit by the bullets, so he flies away into his freedom. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. It's the early 60s and racial tensions are running high in America. Tony Vallelonga is just trying to make ends meet as a waiter at the Copacabana Club in New York, but when he sees an opportunity to make some extra cash by stealing the hat of a mafia boss, he jumps on it. One thing he doesn't realize, however, is that this one impulsive decision will cost him his livelihood. The mafia threatens to burn the entire club down, leading to the place getting temporarily shut down. Tony thus finds himself in hot water over a petty theft, with no means of putting food on the table for himself or his family. The morning after the Copacabana is shut down, Tony wakes up to find his father, father-in-law, and brothers all waiting in the living room watching soccer. When asked why they are there, they motion towards the African-American plumbers working in the kitchen next to Tony's wife Dolores. Their meaning is clear. They don't trust them. Dolores is a kind and compassionate woman, which makes her an exception in this particular room. She doesn't share her in-laws' prejudice and offers the contractors some lemonade. Unfortunately, the good intentions only go so far, as Tony ends up throwing the men's glasses into the trash after they stop drinking from them. It's a small but telling act that reveals exactly where his sympathies lie. Tony is a family man, and he is determined to do whatever it takes to provide for his loved ones. He tries various things to get money, including selling his most prized possession and competing in a hot dog eating contest. It does bring in some cash, but not enough to support his family by a long shot. So, when a call comes in from a friend of his about a job opportunity, Tony jumps at the chance. He's offered an interview for the position of a doctor's personal driver. With money being tight and no other way to pay the bills, the offer is a godsend. Tony is feeling confident as he makes his way to Carnegie Hall for the interview. Upon entering the place, Tony is struck by the bright, opulent interiors. It's a far cry from the cramped apartment he shares with his family. He is greeted by a black man in a fancy gold brocade caftan, who introduces himself as Dr. Don Shirley, a pianist with a doctorate. Tony is taken aback. This is very much not what he expected to see. The doctor tells Tony about the job, an 8-week tour from the Midwest to the Deep South. Tony's discomfort is as good as written all over his face, prompting Shirley to ask him if he is up to the task of working for a black man. Despite his visible reservations, he tells Tony that he has good references and would be a great fit if hired. He knows that the journey won't be easy, and Tony seems like the man for the job. Shirley offers him the job, but Tony is torn. On one hand, he's desperate for the money, and this opportunity would let him provide for his family. On the other, the job would entail extra services like ironing Shirley's clothes or shining his shoes, and Tony's not willing to be another man's butler. He ends up walking away, determined to protect his dignity at all costs. The next day, Shirley calls and tells Tony that he's willing to drop the extra duties if he'll still take the job. For $125 and expenses, Tony agrees. On the first day of their trip, the record company gives him half of his paycheck up front, some maps of the road, and a copy of the Green Book, a travel guide of all the places in the US that a black man can safely visit. After a tearful goodbye with his family, Tony climbs into the driver's seat and sets off on their journey. As they travel, it becomes clear that Tony and Shirley are polar opposites. Tony is talkative and unpolished, while Shirley is serious and refined. Try as he might, Tony just can't get his rough edges sanded off. Despite their differences though, the two men begin to form a bond that will change their lives forever. Tony and Shirley make their way to Pittsburgh for the first show. There, an issue comes up. Tony's Italian surname might be a challenge for some to pronounce. Shirley suggests that Tony use an alias, but the man refuses to enter a room where his name can't be pronounced. He chooses instead to hang out with the other valets while the Don Shirley trio takes the stage. It's the first time Tony has ever heard the doctor play the piano, and he's immediately captivated by the talent on display. After the show is over, Tony sits down to write a letter to his wife Dolores, telling her about Shirley and their travels. Try as he might though, he just can't seem to find the right words to express the depth of his feelings. He wants to tell her how much he loves and appreciates her, but the words that come out on the page just can't convey that. When they reach Hanover for their next show, Tony goes to the auditorium to make sure everything is in place for the performance. When he gets there, he's dismayed to find that the piano is dirty and unbranded. According to Shirley's contract, he's supposed to always be given a Steinway piano to play. Tony tries to get the issue fixed with the auditorium's cleaner, but the man's prejudice gets in the way. In the end, Tony loses his temper and slaps the cleaner in front of Oleg, the cellist, and George, the bassist. Thankfully, the commotion causes management to step in and arrange for a Steinway piano to be brought in. As they make their way to the next show, the car is filled with the sounds of the music blaring from the radio. Shirley finds himself enjoying the music. When the song ends, he asks Tony about the artist. Tony is surprised to learn that Shirley does not know Little Richard, as he's also a very famous black singer, and he just assumed that would be something Shirley knows. He tries to explain to Shirley just how significant Little Richard is to the black community, and how he really should be familiar with his music. He ends up playfully asking Shirley whether he is even actually black. His intentions are good, but he ends up leaving Shirley flustered. As they are driving, Tony can't resist stopping at a KFC to pick up a bucket of fried chicken. Shirley, not liking the idea of eating with his bare hands, has never tried it. However, after being continuously pushed at by Tony, he takes a bite. He is pleasantly surprised by how much he likes it. They start to bond and enjoy each other's company. Shirley starts opening up to Tony about his personal life. He talks about his family and his failed marriage and how he doesn't have much of a life because he's always on the road as a pianist. As they make another stop, the duo comes across a vendor selling Lucky Charm decorative stones. Neither of them buys any, but Tony sees that one has fallen off onto the ground and pockets it. Though the seller doesn't notice, Shirley does. He condemns Tony for the theft and demands that he returns it immediately. When they reach Louisville, Shirley is made to stay in a different motel than the white members of the crew. It's a run-down place filled with African Americans who have no choice but to stay there. Tony is hesitant to leave Shirley alone, but he has no choice. As he sits outside his room, enjoying a bottle of Cutty Sark, Shirley's asked to join a game. He has no clue how to play, so he sheepishly excuses himself and decides to go out for a drink instead. However, as this is Kentucky in the 1960s, and he is a black man walking into a bar at night, he almost immediately gets assaulted by racist patrons. As Shirley is getting beat up, George, the bassist, who is there to witness the gruesome scene, rushes to get Tony for help. Tony steps in, and after threatening to shoot the attackers, gets Shirley out of trouble. He is furious over the doctor's careless behavior, and at the same time, extremely concerned about Shirley's well-being. He instructs Shirley to never go out without his protection ever again. Shirley agrees to this and apologizes for his carelessness. He asks Tony if he actually has a gun on him, which the man immediately denies. The next day, as they make their way to North Carolina, the car begins to overheat. Tony stops it and pours water over the engine to cool it down. Shirley, uncomfortable in the heat, steps out of the car as well, only to see that they are parked outside of a farm tended to by African American workers. All of them have dropped their tools and are staring at the duo and the odd situation they found themselves in. Their gazes make Shirley uncomfortable, as he is painfully aware of the differences and similarities between them. Sometime later, Shirley and his trio are excited to perform at an influential family's house in Raleigh. They are warmly welcomed, and the family has even arranged for a feast in honor of Shirley's talent. It all seems nice and pleasant until during the intermission, things take a turn for the worse. Shirley asks to use the restroom, and instead of one of the bathrooms in the house, he is directed to a wooden cabin on the lawn. When he refuses to use it, the host insists on him holding it in for an extra hour, as he is unwilling to let a black man use his washroom. Tony is outraged by this behavior, and even more so by the fact that Shirley seems prepared to endure it instead of standing up for himself. As Tony rants about it to George, Oleg interrupts him and urges him to keep calm, warning that things are only going to get worse at the upcoming concerts. During breakfast, Tony once again starts writing a letter to Dolores, pouring his heart and soul into every word. The results remain underwhelming. Seeing the letter state, Shirley tries to bite his tongue, but eventually his desire to help gets the best of him. He dictates the contents of the letter for Tony to write down, trying to capture the meaning behind Tony's original awkward words. With Shirley's help, emotions pour onto the pages. The letter leaves Dolores in tears when she finally gets to read it. The duo arrives in Georgia. As they walk down a street, Shirley's eyes can't help but be drawn to a shop selling perfectly tailored suits. He's drawn to one in particular and eagerly approaches it, only to be told he's not allowed to try it on. The rejection stings, and Shirley is deeply offended. He channels that anger into his music, though he draws a line at letting it mar his performance. However, the energy still has to go somewhere, leading Shirley to make a rash decision, landing him in hot water. Later that evening, Tony gets a call from the local YMCA. He races over to find Shirley handcuffed and naked in the shower with another man. Homosexuality is just not tolerated. It is a crime. The scandal could ruin Shirley. Despite his issues with race, Tony turns out to be much more understanding when it comes to sexual orientation. As the police threaten to take the doctor to jail, he uses his charm, wit, and a little bit of bribery to talk them out of it. Shirley is not a fan of the way he handles the situation, but Tony maintains that he had no other choice. The two get into a heated argument over it. Despite their differences, the men are still bound by a contract, so they hit the road and next morning head for Memphis, Tennessee. As Tony is unloading their bags from the car, he is spotted by the local members of the Italian mob. They're surprised to see him working for a man of color and invite him out for drinks that night, while also offering him a different job. Tony turns down the offer, but agrees to meet up with them for drinks anyway. Later that night, as Tony is leaving his room, he is stopped by an anxious Shirley. He offers Tony a promotion and a pay raise, hoping to stop him from leaving. Tony is taken aback by the offer and makes it clear that he has no issues with his job or pay and has no intention of accepting the new position. Shirley is deeply moved and apologizes for the previous night's event. With the air between them cleared, Tony and Shirley sit together with a bottle of Cutty Sark and talk about Shirley's career as a pianist. The doctor tells Tony about his mother teaching him to play the piano and how he used to tour the Florida Panhandle, where he was noticed by a man who helped him study classical music. Despite his love for classical music, Shirley's record company pressured him to perform more popular music because of the color of his skin. Tony, a huge fan of Shirley's work, tells him that his music is unique and special. Shirley is touched by the compliment and thanks Tony for his kind words. As the weeks pass, Tony continues to seek Shirley's help with his letters to Dolores, who then reads them aloud to her entire family. Everyone is impressed by the quality of Tony's writing, wondering when did he get so good at expressing his emotions. Shirley and Tony's friendship keeps getting stronger, and while this looks strange to people, they could not care less. Weeks start rushing by, and it is finally time for the last show in Birmingham. As they are making their way there, it starts pouring down. They lose their way into the stormy night and are stopped by the police. When the officer sees Shirley, he informs them that they are in a sundown town. a place where black people are not allowed to be after dark. The two men are ordered to get out of the car. The officer is aggressive and bigoted. After learning that Tony is half Italian, he makes a racist joke about the other half of his heritage, calling him a slur. This causes Tony to lose his temper, and he knocks the cop down with a punch. Both Tony and Shirley are thrown in jail. Tony for assaulting a police officer, and Shirley just because. Desperate to get out and make it to their show on time, Shirley makes a call he never thought he would have to make. Minutes later, the chief of police answers his phone, and after a quick conversation, orders the immediate release of the two men. To Tony's surprise, he learns that Shirley has called the U.S. Attorney General, who then made the state governor order their release. Tony is impressed by this, but Shirley is fuming that he had been forced to call in a favor from an important contact for such a petty issue. He is further upset at Tony for causing the scene after one instance of discrimination that he himself had been forced to endure his whole life. During the ensuing argument, Tony tells Shirley that he is blacker than him anyway, on the basis of Shirley's posh behavior and lack of connection to his own people. Hurt, Shirley asks Tony to stop the car and steps out into the rain. He has a breakdown about how lonely he is in life, how he lost touch with his only brother, and how he felt like he didn't belong anywhere. The black community saw him as not black enough, while the white community looked down upon him as soon as he stepped off the stage. The words hang heavy in the air. Tony is struck by the depth of Shirley's pain. Not knowing what to say, the two men drive off in tense silence and settle into a hotel. After the night that he had, Tony feels the need to pen a letter to Dolores, even as he knows he will be home in a few days. Seeing this, Shirley offers to help him, only to learn that under his guidance, Tony has learned to express himself through words and doesn't need assistance. He can't help but be proud of him. The next morning, Tony and Shirley arrive in Birmingham for the final performance of their tour. As soon as the doctor steps out of the car, he is welcomed like a celebrity by the general manager, Mr. Kindle, who calls him the guest of honor and escorts him towards his dressing room, which turns out to be a dirty storage closet behind the kitchen. Despite the less than ideal accommodations, Shirley remains cordial and eager to play his set. Him and Tony agree to meet up in the restaurant before the show for a quick bite. Tony is joined by George and Oleg for his meal, and the three have a drink together. Oleg reveals the real reason behind the tour. He tells Tony that Shirley was determined to change the mindset of white people and open their hearts to his community. Tony is touched by this and saddened by the realization of just how tough it must be to be a black person. As Shirley, all dressed up for his set, makes his way towards the table, he is stopped by the concierge and informed that he is not permitted to dine there. Seeing the commotion, Tony approaches them and requests the general manager, asking him to make an exception. The request is denied, and Shirley is given the choice between eating in the storage closet or going down the road to a bar called Orange Bird, and declares that he will not perform unless he is allowed to have his dinner with dignity. Mr. Kindle asks Tony aside and offers him a bribe to convince Shirley to perform. Tony, deeply insulted, pins Kindle to the wall. Seeing this, Shirley asks Tony if he thinks he should cancel the concert or just walk away. Tony is proud to see his friend hold his ground so well, and without a second thought, the two walk out of the hotel. They drive down to the Orange Bird, a bar full of black people, and have a hearty meal. At the request of the bartender, Shirley plays the piano, and for the first time, Tony hears him play classical music, something he was never allowed to do before a white audience. Tony is moved and teary-eyed by the end of the performance. The two have a great time at the bar. Tony has never seen Shirley this happy. As they exit, they are approached by a pair of young men who want to mug them. Tony ends the attempt quickly, scaring the criminals by firing a few shots into the air. He had the gun all along. They hit the road again. Tony is eager to make it home in time for Christmas Eve, but the snow keeps pouring. With a snowstorm warning on the radio, Tony has not slept at all and finds it difficult to keep driving. He decides to stop the car and stay over at a hotel for the night, but Shirley refuses. Knowing how important this is to Tony, he takes over the wheel and drives them to New York. Before he does that, he makes Tony put the gem he stole from the vendor up on the dashboard. As he races against time, navigating through the storm, Shirley's eyes are glued to the gem. Once they arrive, Shirley helps Tony out of the car. Tony invites him to come inside to meet his family. Shirley is well aware that they are not his biggest fans and politely declines the offer, making his way to a full-furnished yet empty apartment. Standing there, all alone on Christmas Eve, Shirley once again looks at the gemstone and makes a decision. Tony has a heartwarming reunion with his family, including his children and most importantly, his wife Dolores, as they sit together on the dinner table, exchanging details from when Tony was away at work. There's a knock on the door. Tony opens it to welcome some unexpected guests, and as he's shutting the door, he sees Shirley standing there. Delighted to see his friend, he gives him a tight hug and introduces him to his family, who welcome him with open arms. Dolores hugs Shirley, and while he thanks her for letting him borrow her husband, she thanks him for his help with Tony's letters. The two share a smile, as if acknowledging that everything has changed for the better now. A high school girl named Hannah was walking down a bridge in the middle of the night. She gets nervous and gets into a car with someone and goes away. After this, we see a middle-aged man named Lee, who is a boxing coach. He goes to a restaurant with a trophy that was awarded to his student for being first runner-up in a match. It turns out that he was supposed to win the competition, but a corrupt official made his rival win for money. Lee is short-tempered and cannot tolerate when people treat his students unfairly. When the officer tries to argue with him, he throws his hand and knocks him out with a punch. However, the man turns out to be the vice president of the boxing association, who has the authority to ban Lee from coaching. Lee's sister is angry, as this is not the first time she has been kicked out of an organization for fighting. After some effort, he gets a job as a gym teacher in the rural area of the city. In the next scene, he is driving towards the city when the car's tire bursts. While waiting for the tow truck to arrive, he noticed a missing poster on a notice board. The girl seen in the picture is Hannah, a high school girl, the one we saw at the beginning of the film, on which someone has written a message joking about disappearing. Lee thinks this is disgusting and tries to erase the text, but this makes the situation worse. Upon reaching town, he sees 3 high school girls bullying someone. The victim is Maggie, best friend of the missing girl, who is angry at the crooks for drawing on her posters. When she confronts them, the crooks claim they didn't do it, but it is clear that they do not want Hannah to return. Lee tries to separate them, but the girls instead tell him to mind his own business. Next, he meets Dom, his former student and a police officer. He welcomes Lee to town and shows him around. Next, we see Maggie go to Hannah's house to meet her grandmother, discovering that Hannah's only family is her grandmother, who is worried about her missing. She and Maggie are the only ones actively trying to find Hannah, while the police are barely working on the case. Maggie goes to the terrace and remembers her time spent with Hannah. She suddenly remembered that Hannah used to work part-time in a club. After doing some research, she comes across the club's card and decides to go there and check it out. The next day, it was Lee's first day on the job. The principal introduces him to his colleagues and sets him up with an art teacher named Chul. Along with being the gym teacher, he has also been appointed as the student dean. The principal assigned him the task of collecting lunch fees from the students. During the lunch break, Lee asked them for money, but none of the girls obliged to do as instructed. On the way, he meets Maggie, but she also rejects him. After a while, Lee notices that she is jumping off the wall and not going to school. He follows her to the market, but is distracted by a claw machine. For the first time in his life, Lee wins a stuffed toy and is very happy. Maggie, on the other hand, sees an election campaign being run for a powerful politician named Mr. Kim. Most of the public is not aware that he is a corrupt and evil person. She ignores the campaign and goes to the club where Hannah worked. She asks people nearby if they have seen Hina, but she doesn't get a definite answer. The club owner threatens to kick him out and are about to get handsy when Lee arrives and saves him. He also advises her to stay away from the case, as the police will be working on it. Later that night, he drops her home and returns back to his apartment. When Hannah is alone, a stranger follows her and tries to kidnap her. Lee, on the other hand, notices that she left her cell phone in the car and goes back to return it. He meets the kidnapper, who runs away after seeing that he is about to be captured. Lee brings Hannah to the hospital and files an official complaint with the police. However, when the police chief is told that Maggie is Hannah's friend, he tries to dismiss the case. It's almost as if he's trying to hide something about Hannah's disappearance. Later, Lee talks to his police friend Dawn about Hannah's case and learns that the police have not yet officially registered it. They think she is a runaway who has gone to some city to escape responsibilities. Lee knows this can't be true, and he makes it his mission to find out what really happened to Hannah. He goes to her house and meets her grandmother. If she writes a formal letter to the police station and signs the consent form, the police will have no option but to file a missing report. The plan works, and Dong files a case for them. Lee also did some research into the matter around the school. He was told that Hannah was the worst student they had ever had. She was absent for half the year and was considered crazy. The teacher suggests that he stay away from her case for his own good. Maggie overhears them talking about her friend and becomes angry. She pulls Lee aside, saying that everyone is lying to her to hide the real reason for Hannah's disappearance. Lee doesn't know who is telling the truth. Before leaving, Hannah asks him what he would have done if Hannah was his daughter. The question clarifies his thinking, causing him to register that even though Hannah is a fugitive, she needs to be found. Next, Lee finds a group of girls smoking in the bathroom. He looks around for a packet of cigarettes, but instead, he finds a hidden camera in a stall. He immediately goes to the principal to apprise him of the situation. The principal does not give him a chance to talk, and wants him to stay away from Hannah's case. The comment reveals that Lee doesn't want to tell them about the camera, so he brings it back and looks at its contents himself. It turns out that the camera was set up by art teacher Chul, which is posted right near his desk. Lee goes to call him out for being a pervert, but discovers that he has already left for home. Taking a chance, he looks at Chul's laptop and is surprised to see text messages between him and Hannah. The night she went missing, he had texted her to pick her up from the bridge. It is clear that he knows something about the matter. Lee immediately called his police friend, but he did not answer the phone. He then calls Maggie and asks her where she is. She leaves in a car with Chul, who offers to drive her home. Lee quietly tells him everything about Chul and tells him to be careful. She cleverly tells Chul where they are going and texts Lee the location so that he can find it easily. She then notices that Chul's key ring looks similar to the one that Hina has. She asks him about him, but is punched and knocked unconscious. When she opened her eyes, she was bound and gagged on her bedroom floor. She sees that Chul has Hannah's phone in the cupboard. Before she can do any harm to him, Lee arrives and forces his way into the house. Chul tries to stop him, but fails against the former national boxing champion. He is punched to the floor and tied up, pleading with Lee not to report him, as his career would be over. But Lee doesn't care. He asks the pervert about Hannah, but he claims to know nothing about her disappearance. According to him, Hannah had called him to pick him up from the club that night. He was taking her home when he got a call from someone else and was asked to drop him at the gas pump. She said someone else was coming to pick her up, so Chul went home without thinking too much about it. But a few minutes later, he felt uncomfortable leaving a girl alone at night. But when he returned to pick her up, she was already missing. He found his phone on the road and kept it, claiming not to know anything else. Soon, Chul is jailed for his misbehavior, but the police chief still refuses to believe that Hannah was kidnapped. Even when Lee insists that he should work harder on the case, he dismisses the conversation. After Lee leaves, we see the chief calling someone and telling them to be careful. This proves that someone else is also involved in the kidnapping, and the chief is helping them. At school, the principal calls Lee into his office and fires him for taking too much interest in Hannah's case. It's clear to Lee that everyone in town is trying to hide what happened to him. So before he can think about the next move, his police friend Dawn calls him to a location immediately. Upon arriving, Lee sees Hannah's body being taken away in an ambulance. Maggie begins to cry over the death of her best friend. Lee realizes that the killers may be targeting Maggie as well, as she was their best friend. At the moment, they go to the hospital to visit Hannah's grandmother, who is ill. His condition worsens when he receives the news of his granddaughter's death. On the other hand, Dong overhears his superiors talking, and he realizes that the chief is taking money from someone to cover up the matter. He decides to do his own investigation, and steals Hannah's phone, which was found earlier. After repairing it and reading the texts, he sees that Hannah talked to a woman from the club named Isol. He informs Lee about the woman, but right after the call, someone knocks him out from behind. After this, Lee goes to the bar and meets the woman. When pressed, she reveals that Hannah used to be a part-time singer in the club. The night she disappeared, the politician Mr. Kim, the bar's chairman, and the police inspector had gathered at the club. While she was performing, she got a call from the hospital that her grandmother was ill. She asked permission from the chairman, but he started misbehaving with her. She eventually ran away, while being chased by the bar owner. Isol doesn't know what happened to him after that. The bar owner and his men attack Lee, but he manages to fight them all off. When only the owner was left, he asked the man why he killed Hannah. The terrified man admitted that he had stalked Hannah that night, but that he was not responsible for her death. In fact, he had found her strangled to death in a public bathroom. The one who killed him was none other than Chul. He is Mr. Kim's son, and is not afraid of anyone because of his father's influence. He loved Hannah, and when she refused to obey him, he killed her. After finding this out, an angry Lee calls Dawn and learns that Chul has already been released from the police station, meaning Maggie's life is also in danger. When she doesn't answer his phone, he immediately goes to Chul's house. On the other hand, Chul finds Maggie and kidnaps her at another location. But he stops when her father comes to the house. Not wanting Mr. Kim to know that he has kidnapped Maggie, he locks her inside a closet before taking her away. Mr. Kim is angry because of all the problems his son has caused. He ordered Chul to go to America and never return. In return, Chul accuses him of murdering Hannah. It was then revealed that Kim had been called to the public bathroom to handle the matter. But when she discovered that Hannah was still alive, she killed her to save her reputation. To complete what his son had started after he was gone, Maggie attacks Joel and manages to escape outside, but it doesn't take long for him to catch up. He is seconds away from killing him when Lee comes in and attacks him. After beating her to a pulp, he brings Maggie to the hospital, as she is seriously injured. On the other hand, Mr. Kim wins the election and is elected as the governor of the city. He is now stronger than ever. Lee watches the news on TV, and filled with anger, he drives his car onto the highway and hits the car in which Mr. Kim is sitting. After beating the driver, he approaches the politician, who is still trembling with fear. He tries to scare Lee, asking him if he knows who he is, but Lee doesn't care about his situation. The next morning, the truth about Kim and the police inspector make national news. They are arrested for Hannah's murder. In the final scene, Lee visits Maggie in the hospital and leaves the stuffed toy he won in the claw machine for her. He then moves to another city in hopes of starting a new life. And this movie ends here. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.